discussion until the next meeting. So with that, we'll move on to the discussion of the survey results, and we'll go to the WIPS team.
Do I need to use this?
Yes.
Okay. So hi, everybody. I'm April. Good to see you in person. So we have a number of slides here, and I don't know if everybody has seen or been able to view the slides at all in advance. Okay. So you'll have to, we'll have to be patient with each other. I don't know how fast you're going to want to go through things. And I was playing with the data all weekend and trying to prepare these slides yesterday. So I don't remember what slide comes after what slide, right? So I think I have a good idea, right? But I don't even have the printout in front of me. I was in training all day. So, okay. So a reminder of the objectives that we had at hand. I summarized what we talked about after those multiple meetings to talk about survey design, what our objectives were. And I'm going to take these by step as we go through the slides. So we were assessing community members' attitudes towards the Wausau Police Department in general, ratings of police department performance, transparency, desire to work with members of the community, and so on. A second broad objective was to assess members' perceptions of officer behaviors and demeanor. A third was to assess community members' attitudes about various policing issues, such as military tactics, how they're handling mental health situations, recruitment efforts. A fourth objective was to assess community members' feelings about their treatment in recent interactions with the Wausau Police Department. We asked them if they had been arrested. We asked them if they had sought help from the police, and so on. So we asked about their reactions to those interactions if they had had them. And then a fifth, and this is a relatively small piece, we wanted to find out what the sources of information were that community members are relying on most for learning about Wausau Police Department activities. Okay, so hopefully that's a good refresher. And of course, another big piece was just to assess whether any of these dimensions, primarily the first four objectives, right, community members' attitudes, differed systematically for different subsets of the community. Okay, so do we have differential attitudes by age, gender, sexual orientation, race and ethnicity, so on? Okay. All right, so the total sample, we've got 1,231 respondents. There are a couple of times in the slides where I report sample sizes or cell sizes for a group, and that's just to remind us that in any given analysis, there are respondents who maybe didn't answer a question. So we don't always have 1,231 responses that we're working with for any given question. We often have around 1,000 or so, but there are people who didn't answer questions here and there. Okay. Missing responses were, by the way, pretty sporadic. There were people who just missed a page, just like, just missed the first 2 pages, and then responses would start showing up. And then there are people who just, obviously felt like not answering certain questions. Okay, very common in data when you collect big data sets. So I think the response, I guess I don't remember how many went out. 5,000. So in my mind, this is a pretty great response rate. For the paper and pencil to get over 20% back. 715 out of 5,000. I'm thinking 1,200. And then over online, still even close to, what do we have? 18%, 17 or 18% paper and pencil. That's not bad. Those are all in English. I don't remember if did the paper and pencil survey show up in multiple languages? Okay, so those are all in English by default. On the online survey, there was a Spanish version and a Hmong version. Everybody was in English except for 2 that did the Spanish. So, okay, so the breakdown of the sample. Just so you know the sample characteristics, and I don't have offhand all the data on Wausau census, right, and how our sample at this point compares. That's something that we're going to have to consider. But those who participated, 95% reported that they had lived or were living in Wausau. And of those, 78% had been in Wausau for more than 10 years. 86% reported that they had worked or were working in Wausau. And of those, 73% had been and working in Wausau for over 10 years. Some more characteristics here. About 10% of the sample was 30 or younger, and the remaining were 31 and up. Now, the written report that I have drafted has more categories, right? We did like 17 and under, 18 to 21, 21 or 22 to 30, and so on. But I think a really key element here is that 10% are 30 and under. And even today at some of the sessions I was at for UW-Eau Claire faculty training, when we think about age and how it's related to various factors and thinking about, say, college students and their well-being, we know age is a big one. And that's showing up in these data as well. I'll get to that in a second. 44% were identified as men and 55% as women. The non-binary was like 0.6%. So a very small portion. Sexual orientation, we have over 90% heterosexual, and bisexual and homosexual and other are the remaining 9%. Race and ethnicity, again, we had more subgroups than this, but I think key for you to be aware of is over 90, I think it was 95% were white, and 5% were reported that they were participants of color. So we had in that group, we have Black, white Hispanic, Black Hispanic, Native, Pacific Islander, I think Asian. Homeowners, over 80% were homeowners. They or their family owned the house they lived in. And then mental health concerns, we had 68%. So this is in the survey, if you don't remember, we asked them, do you have a history of a mental health issue? Check any that apply. Depression, and I gave examples. For example, major depression, bipolar disorder, okay, like a mood disorder. Anxiety disorder, for example, generalized anxiety, phobia, and so on. And there were 5 categories: mood disorder, anxiety disorder, psychotic disorder, eating disorder, and addiction, and then other. There were 68% that reported none of those. There were 32% that reported one or more. Comorbidity is very common in the sample as well. People who reported one tended to report another, but not always. Questions about the sample so far? Okay, so stops in the past year. I didn't report the numbers here. We have about, I want to say it was 85% had 0 stops in the past year. 10%, yeah, 85, 10, and 5, I think. 85% 0, 5%, 10%, sorry, 1 stop in the past year, and 5% 2 or more stops in the past year. Arrests in the past year, 97% reported 0 stop or arrests in the past year, and 3% had 1 or more. So that was a yes or no question. Okay, so a really important thing to keep in mind is that these demographic characteristics that I've just gone over overlap quite a bit. So in the written draft I have, and this is something I would like us to discuss, to think about if there's a tactic that you want me to take to try to explore this further. Let's just look at those who have had a police interaction. Those who have had a police interaction, meaning have been stopped or pulled over or arrested by the police, tend to be younger, are more likely to be male, are more likely to be of non-heterosexual orientation, are more likely to be non-white, are more likely to have a mental health concern, and are less likely to be homeowners. All the other variables, whatever variable you take, you can look at how it relates to the others. So for example, our participants who are 30 and younger compared to 31 and up. The participants who are 30 and under do not differ from the older group in gender, But they do differ on all the other variables. They're more likely to have had a police interaction, arrest or stop. They're less likely to be homeowners. They're more likely to have a mental health issue, one or more. In fact, 68% of those who are 30 or younger reported a mental health issue, compared to 30% of those who are older. Yeah, I was like, whoa. And it actually is, it's relevant because it fits the student clientele I'm struggling with right now. The younger participants, the 30 and under group, also were more likely to be non-white and also were more likely to have a non-heterosexual orientation. So 18% non-heterosexual compared to the base rate of approximately 6. Okay, so I hope that helps kind of give a couple of examples of how these demographic variables are related. And I think they're really important because nearly every one of these variables is related to people's attitudes. Okay, so let's take the first one. Community members' attitudes toward the Wausau Police Department. We'll look at a few slides. So how would you grade the overall performance of the Wausau Police Department? This was essentially the first question that participants or respondents received or responded to. I threw out when there was a judgment that was, say, more favorable to less favorable. I tried to put the favorable options in green, the maybe neutral response in orange, yellow, and the we could worry about this one in red, okay? Throughout on the graphs, when we have a variable that I don't know that there was a clear favorable versus unfavorable response, I just did it like shades of gray, okay? So I don't know if you want me to read the numbers here, but hopefully you get the gist that many people are giving a nice favorable response. The Wausau Police Department is doing a good job of promoting community health and well-being. We have 69% agree or strongly disagree, 12% disagreeing or strongly disagreeing. Keeping the community safe, 82% are positive. Notice these always don't round to an even 100 because of rounding, or add to an even 100 because of rounding, and making sure that people are obeying the law. So majority positive responses, which is good. 3 more general attitudes. The WPD is committed to working with people in the community to solve local problems. Makes it easy for people in the community to provide input. That one is a little more ambivalent, I think, and is open and forthcoming to the community about their actions. So here we see about 1 in 8 for each of these items. 1 in 8 people are disagreeing or strongly disagreeing. Trust in the Wausau Police. If I experienced domestic violence and went to the Wausau Police, they'd take me seriously. The majority agree or strongly disagree. Very similar numbers for if I experienced sexual assault. In case I forget to mention it in the next slide, this specific question, if I experienced sexual assault and went to the Wausau Police, participant responses did not differ by gender. Men and women were similar in their agreement with this statement. Similar to the other one, actually, domestic violence. I trust the Wausau Police to take my concerns seriously. Again, the majority agreeing, and I feel comfortable approaching the Wausau Police. Again, the majority agreeing. Okay, so of those demographic characteristics I talked about, which of these are associated with more negative responses for the items that we just saw? And you're going to see this pattern probably a few times on the next set of slides. Participants who were non-white responded more negatively compared to those who were white. Non-heterosexual respondents compared to heterosexual respondents were more negative. Those who had a mental health history were more negative. The younger group was more negative. The non-homeowners were more negative. And those who had had a police interaction history were more negative. So, and I didn't provide the specific numbers. I didn't want you to get caught up in like what percent and what percent. I more just was like, is there a statistically reliable difference between these two basic groups, younger versus older, right? Men versus women on each of those variables, okay? But we have the numbers, right, in the written report that you also have, John. Okay, objective 2, perceptions of Wausau police officer behaviors and demeanor. Okay, so this is the percent of respondents who felt that Wausau police officers often or always. So we had a never, rarely, sometimes, often, always. So what percent thought that they often or always did a variety of what I would say are good things, right? Treat people with dignity and respect, are friendly, protect community members' safety, display a good balance of friendly officer and law enforcer, show concern for all members of the community, respond to calls for help in a timely manner. We're looking at upwards of 70% for almost all of those items. This is the percent of respondents who felt that Wausau police officers often or always do a variety of negative behaviors, treat people unfairly, act aggressively, use offensive language with citizens, break the law or policy, department policy as they carry out their work, stop people on the street for no good reason, pull drivers over for no good reason, or use more force than is needed. Low levels here. Okay, attitudes about their perceptions of how things would be if they were approached or pulled over by the Wausau police. I'd feel comfortable asking them to explain what they are doing. High levels of agreement. About 1 in 8 are disagreeing. I would be treated fairly, 80% agree. I would be treated with dignity and respect, over 80% agree. I would feel free to ask them questions, again, good agreement, and I would respectfully follow their requests, 94% agree or strongly agree. The negative perceptions, right, if I were approached or pulled over, I would worry about them being physically aggressive. 80% disagreed or strongly disagreed. So again, we've got green for the more favorable response here. There are 10% who agree or strongly agree that they would worry about the police officer being physically aggressive, and 13% agreeing that they would feel afraid. Same characteristics are associated with more negative responses to those variables we just looked at. Again here, whether they're a Wausau resident or not, and whether they're men or women, is not associated with responding more or less negatively, but the other variables are. There was an exception here. White and non-white participants did not differ in their agreement that they would feel free to ask questions or that they would respectfully follow officers' requests. But for every other item you just saw, these demographic variables predict responses. Okay, community members' attitudes about policing issues, military tactics, handling mental health situations, recruitment efforts, and so on. So we'll look at kind of a hodgepodge here. Over the past 12 months, the level of safety I have felt in my community has. We have decreased a lot, decreased a little, stayed the same, increased a little, increased a lot. So we have about 30% together feeling like safety has decreased in some way. I glanced at one of the WPPA reports this morning, and came across an item like this, and this is a similar percentage of feeling less safety. So in this case, for that variable, white and non-white respondents did not differ in their response to perceptions of lower or any change of safety in their community. But these other demographic groups, again, did differ. The use of military tactics and equipment by the Wausau police always wrong on the left to always right on the right. We have about 70% altogether who feel sometimes wrong and sometimes right or often right. Similar pattern here, non-white and white participants did not differ in their responses, their pattern of response to this question. But those who feel that more military tactics and equipment are wrong, non-heterosexual participants, those with a mental health history, those who are 30 or younger, non-homeowners, those who've had police interaction history. Two questions about respondents' perceptions of how Wausau police are handling mental health issues. Do they adjust their behavior appropriately when mental health issues are a part of the situation they are called to deal with? On the left, we have those participants who reported no mental health concerns. And we see that almost 60% said, I don't have knowledge of this, right? We had an option on the questionnaire, I have no knowledge of or experience with this. Those who did offer an answer, most of them said often or always. The right column, so I'm still on the left-hand figure here, but the right column are the respondents who had reported one or more mental health concerns. And in that case, we have upwards of 50% or so reporting, or about 50% saying, I have no knowledge of or experience with this. Of those who did offer a response, we have most of them saying often or always, but there's a substantial minority there, over 15% who said never or rarely. On the right-hand side, we have responses to, when it comes to managing mental health situations, Wausau police officers are doing a good job. Again, participants who reported no mental health concerns were more likely to say they didn't have knowledge of this, so they were essentially saying, I'm opting out. Again, the most common response is that they often or always are doing a good job. Participants with one or more mental health concerns were more likely to say that the officers are never or rarely doing a good job. Okay, two more questions here. This time I split responses by two different types of demographic groups. So the question on the left was about how Wausau police officers or the Wausau police should treat individuals with a substance addiction. We gave them three options. Should they treat them as criminal offenders, as individuals in need of help? And the third option was on a case-by-case basis. We see in both cases whether the respondents reported no mental health concerns or they had one or more mental health concerns. The most common response was to treat them on a case-by-case basis. You can see that respondents who had one or more mental health concerns were more likely to give the response as individuals in need of help. The question on the right, the Wausau police should treat individuals with a criminal record. Okay, again, same three options were given, and this time I split it by those who had 0 arrests in the past year and those with one or more arrests in the past year. By the way, that 3% of respondents who reported an arrest in the past year, that was 40. So you have an N of 40 right there. Thoughts on policing. The Wausau Police Department should spend more resources on training their officers to safely de-escalate conflict situations. 68% agreed or strongly agreed with this. The most of the remaining participants were neutral. And substantial agreement that police officers should be offered regular mental health checkups and support, and that they have a stressful job. Okay, so who agrees more? Just that very first question about safely de-escalating conflict situations, spending time and resources on training officers. Non-white and white participants did not differ in their responses to this question. Women agreed more that the department should spend more resources. Non-heterosexual participants, those with a mental health history, those who were younger, those who were non-homeowners, and those who had a police arrest history agreed more that the police department should spend more resources on officer training to safely de-escalate conflict situations. We had 3 items about recruiting. We asked how much participants agreed or disagreed that the Wausau Police Department should spend more time and effort on recruiting gender diverse candidates. That's your first set of bars. Racially or ethnically diverse candidates. That's your middle set of bars. And then candidates of good character. And there are a couple of notable things here. One is that the bars on the far right are higher overall than the other 2 sets of bars. And none of them differed, meaning you comparing men and women, comparing white versus non-white respondents, people tended to agree. And it also is the case for differences in age group and homeowners and so on. Participants agreed, right, that they gave just general high ratings to recruiting candidates of good character. In 2 places, men and women differed, with women agreeing more that the police department should spend more time and effort on recruiting gender diverse candidates and racially or ethnically diverse candidates. A final note, at least I'm just commenting on things that I noticed in the data, right? Or non-findings essentially, or non-significant differences that I think people may have been expecting. White and non-white participants did not differ in how much they agreed that the department should spend more time and effort on recruiting racially or ethnically diverse candidates. Okay, community members' feelings about their treatment in recent interactions with the Wausau Police Department. Okay, so we asked them about a number of types of situations that they could have interacted, and then we asked them, were you treated with dignity and respect on that last occasion? So there were 44 people who reported an arrest, okay, and we have a lot of people saying that they were given they weren't treated at all with respect or a little. There were 200 that reported that they were approached, stopped, or pulled over by the Wausau police. And here we have quite a few reporting that they were treated with a lot or a great deal of respect. 59% to be exact. There were 133 that made a 911 emergency call to request Wausau police assistance. Here, almost over 70% reported that they were treated with a lot or a great deal of respect. And then 429 said they sought help or assistance from the Wausau Police Department in the past year. So 429 of around 1,200 participants, I thought that's a nice number. A third of respondents had sought help. And 78% felt that they were treated with a lot or a great deal of dignity and respect. Those who were arrested, we did not ask them. Oh, I should stop, by the way. We have some open-ended comments on how they felt about their treatment, the dignity and respect question. We do have open-ended comments. I have them in the Word document right now. Most of the comments came from people who were arrested, and who had low ratings. They were not happy with how they were treated. That's the gist of it. There are more open-ended comments to these questions that I have not yet compiled. Within the past 12 months, how did you feel about that interaction in which you were approached, stopped, or pulled over? Again, 201 responded to this question. This is how satisfied or dissatisfied they were with the interaction. Requesting assistance, right, and calling to request assistance, satisfaction levels are higher than for those who were approached, stopped, or pulled over. Seems obvious. Okay, our last objective was to look at sources of information that community members rely on most. We asked them how important it was that they have access to information about the the Wausau Police Department's policies and procedures, that's the bottom row. And then we also asked them how important it was that they have access to information about the daily activities of the Wausau Police Department. And we see people want to know about the policies and procedures. I think they were less likely to say it was very or extremely important to know about the daily activities. And here are the sources that they rely on least to most often. These are ordered in order of most often. So about 30%, over 30% said often for accessing WAOW News 9. And the one that is almost never used often, newsletters and radio, down to the bottom. So, I didn't give the takeaways and next steps because that was for your discussion. But I can try to answer questions and about what I saw in the data, if anything is on your mind.
Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry I'm late. I'm going to go back and rewatch this when I get home or when it's broadcasted, so I apologize for being late tonight. But within the open-ended comments, I've done a lot of surveys like these. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's just erratic. Were there themes that you were able to pull out or kind of real consistent pieces?
So the first set of open-ended comments we have to the respect question. Were you treated with dignity and respect? And I have to think about how I had sorted the data, because my initial reaction is that there were very few open-ended comments, but I think that was just for those who had experienced the arrest. And the majority of them were negative. It felt like they just generally felt like they didn't have their rights were violated in some way. And I didn't go through them carefully enough to even start to categorize them. But these are several different columns in the data set, because depending on which question they answered, we got their comments differently. So, and I didn't look yet at the ones for satisfaction levels. So I think there will be themes, right? Like I was like, oh, I'm capturing negativity here, but the theme of the negativity, the content of the negativity, I didn't even try to categorize.
Yeah.
So.
The really nice thing about you and the team at WIPS is the objectivity that you bring to this, right? Which is some people, maybe even people on the task force, natural human nature that you would draw to things that are confirmation biases, right?
Right.
So, I would be looking for that, from your team, is to really understand the comments. Sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
But even the conclusions from the data, as you were going through some of the conclusions, I was just trying to keep up and, try to critically think as we're doing that, and we'll have time to do that. But for your team to be able to just objectively look at the entirety of this, and then even the individual questions, to draw, what is statistically or meaningful that is really standing out to us based on our experience, I think that'd be extremely valuable.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think there are things that I didn't emphasize, or I didn't test statistically. I could just see it because I knew after seeing the variables so many times, I had an idea of what the standard errors were. But the idea of recruiting candidates of good character relative to candidates who were gender diverse or racially, ethnically diverse. The fact that the bars for candidates of good character, like overall higher, right? Were those actually statistically reliably different? I didn't show you the error bars, but they were, right? And so that's the type of stuff that we'll have to get into the report, right, to make it crystal clear. But I didn't want to get bogged down in the statistics. I just wanted you to see which groupings there was a statistically reliable difference, but know that the data are behind that difference. It's wonderful that the sample size is what it is, because when you can compare, if you have 30 and under compared to 31 and up, 30 and under, it's only 10% of the sample, but it's 109 people, right? So we can still access whether we have some kind of reliable cue here or signal of what's going on. So I think that with these data, it could be really easy to not be objective. And that's why I think you probably missed it at the beginning, but the demographic variables are all interrelated to each other.
So given the demographics, are there some groups that you feel were underrepresented in the survey, completing the survey, that we might want to target with focus groups?
Yeah, that Eric and I talked about that briefly right away. And I don't know in terms of Wausau census what groups were underrepresented. So for example, if 10% of this sample is 30 or younger, maybe it is the case that 10% of adults in Wausau are between 18 and 30, right? And it is an older, 31, and I'm putting 31 as older. You know what I mean? I'd like to know what's going on with these young people. They were more likely to not be homeowners. They were more likely to be non-white. They were more likely to have been arrested. They were more likely to have been pulled over. They were more likely to have a mental health concern. I'd want a focus group of young people, especially if it's the young people that we want to make sure stay here. Because they were the ones who, if there were any groups that so one thing I was going to say about sample size, when there were statistically significant differences between groups, when men and women differed, when 30 and younger differed from 31 and up, the differences are robust. Like they're moderate to strong effect sizes, especially when the groups that differed were younger versus older. And again, I just split it. We could split it in other ways. I just split it as 30 and younger versus 31 and up. Because the next category is 31 to 50, right? Like people who are in the middle of managing a household and raising kids most often. That's why I did the split that way. 30 and younger, 31 and up. But those differences were the biggest. Like if you compared any two groups, those differences were the biggest, followed by non-heterosexual versus heterosexual in terms of effect size. And what I mean by that is if I pulled two people at random off the street and one was under 30 and one was 50, the chances that they would differ in their attitudes about the Wausau police, there's like a 70 to 80% chance that they differ. Like the effect size was good. It was solid. As opposed to like, 50-50 or 55-45 that they would differ. No, there's a good chance they're going to differ if I pulled two people at random off the street like that. Or if I pulled two people at random off the street and one was heterosexual and one was bi or homosexual, the chances that those two people would have different attitudes about the police is high. That's what I mean by effect size.
Other questions relative to the survey?
I have a nerd question. The collinearity and what tests did you run? Did you look like at variance inflation factors or anything
I
yet?
didn't do anything.
Okay. It would just be interesting to see before we know.
Yeah.
That would be something I would be interested in looking at that, what's impact that's going to have.
Yeah, I didn't know if I should think about doing like some kind of discriminant function analysis, like more positive versus negative attitudes. But I'm not experienced with that.
Yeah.
And when I think about multicollinearity, I think about it in the context of regression, and I wasn't really doing regression per se.
Sure.
But on the other hand, that is a question, like, do we want to try to put a whole host of variables together? You can see that people who responded positively to one item or favorably to one item tended to respond favorably to other items. Do we want to group those items together? And then I can regress and try to look at multicollinearity. It's a little more complicated for me, and it would make the report far less friendly. So that would be, yeah. It might not be, it may be good, it may not be.
Eric, you were going to, please, because we're recording this and it's, anywhere there's a live mic.
Just come stand by me.
Okay, maybe if there's another group that was definitely underrepresented, it would have been, in my opinion, the Hmong population. And so, I was frankly kind of disappointed. We didn't get more, but at the same time, not really shocked. So I might argue that if you're looking to do focus groups, that would be another group I would personally advocate.
Matt, were you going to, did I see your hand up?
No, I was just indicating to Mr. Boyd that as Mr. North and the professor were, my mind was blown with, I thought, is there like a for dummies so I can understand what all that means?
Regression analysis for dummies?
That would be very beneficial.
So we were just talking about, how much overlap in the demographic variables? So a number of arrests, homeownership, age, and if you get, there's some debate out there, but if you get a lot of it, then all of a sudden your overall variances are what we call inflated. So that was the variance inflation factor. And so I was just asking if they had done that yet, because when you think about it theoretically, you think about experiences and stuff, you can see some common, like, right, if you have a young, under the age of 30, male, non-homeowner, would there be some assumptions that we're making? And if you're putting it all together when you do the analysis, it can really affect the overall picture. So,
I'll share two takeaways I had as you
If-
went
Do you want
through that.
We want the public to be able to hear.
Lucky them. It just so happens that within the last week, we met with an engineer who does a lot of work with data and with analytics. And as we were looking at how to assess some of our data and what it would mean, one of the recommendations is at some point it kind of blew my mind that we're talking about 30-year-olds and below have this opinion in general, and that the LGBTQ community is more likely to distrust or have a poor interaction with police. And then the question is that something that is a result of law enforcement behaviors, or is that something that society in general with that population? So we were looking, and would there be value in having a sociologist or someone else look at that and see if there are other explanations for that data, or is that something we should just look internally so that it's useful for us? Those are my thoughts.
Well, and that gets back to Mike's comment about the collinearity of the variables. So the participants who are 30, the 30 and younger, and the LGBTQT, community, they also are more likely to have a mental health concern. And all the variables are related to each other. And there is huge debate in psychology and the social sciences in general about what variables cause what. And we have no way of knowing. But it is really striking when you have a subsample with 68% reporting one or more mental health issues, and mental health issues are associated with interacting with the police, right? Like that makes this really messy.
I think one other area I was curious about and thinking about sort of age as well. The last question on how people get their information, I was kind of wondering, was there a difference? Because that's where I thought there may be like a big difference between age in terms of, older population maybe.
Like social media,
Yeah.
and I didn't look at it yet.
Okay.
To be honest, William,
Yes.
I think I was just like getting so tired at that point. I was
No
like,
problem.
oh my gosh, there's so many sources of information right now to look at. And I had that thought, okay, like what are young people doing? Are they more likely to go with social media, Facebook, right? The Wausau Police Department Facebook site and so on. I did not look yet.
Okay, no,
I
that's
will.
all right. I think that, and then if there's because there were different news stations versus different newspapers, whatever, I think we could clump that in, like one, just overall the three categories, news versus print versus social media. and then on age, and see how that turns out in terms of being effective to get information. Because I think
Yeah.
that also plays a role, obviously, in terms of who gets what in terms of information, where they're getting it from on that end. If, are we seeing a lot of, as we try to explain sort of these dramatic differences in terms of age, is it how are they getting the information dramatically
Right,
different?
right. Okay, so let me clarify. When you say news, you mean news TV?
News TV, yes.
And radio, or just TV?
Probably, well, I guess it would depend, in terms of response, because if I'm aging people, but I think radio, I don't know if,
That was pretty low
low.
overall.
So I think maybe we can count out radio if that didn't ring high on either age, but I think the major ones are news, TV, print, and social media.
Okay. And then there's kind of like the personal experiences in family and friends. That's kind of a fourth category.
I think that would be a good one as well.
And
Okay. I like
Okay.
that.
to add, Michael, would you put Wausau Pilot and Review though then in social media? Because since it's not your standard printed material, just as a question.
What is it?
The Wausau Pilot and Review.
Oh, yeah, that was a popular one.
Because it's truly, in essence, it's like it's news, it's sort of in a newspaper like idea, but it's not in I get the Daily Herald delivered, or I pick up the City Pages paper copy. It's the instant online type of feedback that I think we need to clarify where placement of that might go.
I think we want to be careful there because the Wausau Daily Herald is online and in hard form. City Pages is now online and hard copies. So I don't know how you differentiate between the old newspaper that was delivered to your house and the new conveyance of news today, and that's going to be a hard one.
Well, I would say the difference though is, I see social media as different from print. Whether you're getting print online versus print in a paper. When we're talking about Facebook and those types of things, I think that's different, or at least I see it as different. I don't know what other thoughts are.
I think TV news could be one. News that is available in print or online, but it's the same stories. You can just access them online. A third would be social media like Facebook. In this case, the Wausau Pilot would go into the second category of news that's available in print or online.
I would
And-
agree with that. I think it's a news publication, I believe, and I think it's different than, Michael made a legitimate point, but I think it's more of a news organization than a social media site. They are on Facebook, they are on, they get a website, but they email a lot of their, followers, or whatever you want to call them, subscribers. So I would go with the option
The
you
news.
mentioned, yeah.
But I appreciate regardless of how it falls out, I agree. I like the idea of clumping them together and seeing if we can get a general idea of whether young people if they're relying more on social media or personal experience and family and friends as opposed to news sources. That could be important.
And then my other comment, I guess, is we're looking at other underrepresented groups when we're talking about 30 or younger. I know that the schools have been out and over there on UWSP, but now as they go back in, could there be sort of a, reach out and see, I don't know, because I was thinking that much younger population of college age to non-traditional college age there.
Do you mean accessing them for focus groups?
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Would most of the 30 and under who participated in this round have been college students? I don't know. Yeah.
If you didn't ask, we can't tell you.
Yeah, we did not ask that.
Pat?
Just wondering, do you have something to add to that, Eric?
Well, it's kind of on the same theme of, I really appreciated that you thought through, hey, we'd like to break down the news source and compare that demographically. I would just say similarly, if it hasn't been said out loud, if there's any other, correlations or cross tabulations or whatever that you want run, just please email me or April and we'll make sure we do it. We didn't do all of it. I mean, I kept April awake for 24 straight hours, but, she couldn't do it all in that time frame. So sorry about that, April.
We thank you for those efforts.
Yeah. Either can answer, are we getting being sent a set of these slides?
You have them.
It's in the email now.
Okay, I didn't see it when I checked earlier today. I just wanted to say that I'm really enthused about the possibility of these focus groups, especially the young people and Southeast Asians. And I think that if we can gather representative people from those groups in a comfortable setting where they can just maybe verbally share stuff rather than have to go online or write something out or whatever, I think we could get some very candid and helpful information from that. And maybe move the setting for the Southeast Asian one to a setting that they would be more comfortable with. And I'm sure the Hmong Association would be helpful with that. Anyway, I think that's when we go beyond, we got a bunch of good results here, but I think we really get some good nitty-gritty stuff at that point. So I'm very pleased that we're going to be doing that.
Mike?
And I think lastly, I just want to thank you all for the incredible job you did. I mean, that's a lot of information, a lot of good information to go for. I think now we're just, sort of honing it down, but I think it's a lot of excellent information, things that either, you said, sort of confirm some things and some other things sort of help sort of focus as we move forward. So thank you.
Michael?
Yeah, we have a habit of going really late, and with you here, that could happen. But I don't think we're going to do that tonight. But John will keep us in line. But no, I just have two other questions. Something you said just caught me, and I'm not sure I understood it. And it was 3 or 4 comments ago, and it was relative to our sample size, and there was some correlation between mental health and the LGBTQ community, and I wasn't quite sure if you were inferring that it was unique to our data set, or if that was just kind of something that is in the research that those things are correlated.
No, I mean, I saw data today showing relatively dramatic links between age and depression, age and anxiety, age and negative affect. The data were in the age of COVID. But the question on my notepad was, I know there's a link between age and emotional instability. I just don't know if that link is even stronger now than it was 2 years ago. I'm guessing it might be. But either way, in essence, and Mike, you can tell me if you read this differently based on what you've seen here, but I feel like there is a group of respondents who is disposed to have a negative attitude toward a lot of things, and the police could be one of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes
Okay.
perfect sense. And I actually, this conversation about regression analysis, and, there's so much, I'm sure, which explains the 24 hours, right? There's so much that you could pull from this.
Yeah.
It's, what do you focus on? Like,
Right, well, that's
yeah.
that's why I brought it to you at this point, because I was like, I started with the written draft, which, do you have that in the email as well? Okay, so there was a written draft report with more numbers, and then Eric said, well, let's bring this to the task force, and I said, okay, I'll just prepare some slides and just try to give you a visual look. But yeah, I don't...
It's really great because, whenever you're working with data, nothing's ever really truly in isolation, right? And you've made that point a couple times tonight.
Right.
And it's,
Right.
if there is a way for us, in terms of our community, to look at, how these factors might interplay so that there is this, you know, I don't know, like unique mix in our community of factors that predisposes a certain subset of our population that has those characteristics to a negative disposition towards police, that is actionable. I mean, that is something that the police can
Yeah.
truly focus on versus just saying, well, you know, to this question, you know, there was a difference. I really think it's relying on you guys to help us pull those things together to say, you know, really,
Yeah.
here's your focus.
Yeah.
It's cool stuff, I mean.
So I think there's, first of all, I really appreciate all this discussion. Second, one thing that we're going to do for the report, and we just haven't had time yet to do this, is we're also, remember we pulled some of these questions, or at least the kernel of some of those questions, from at least 3-4 other studies, right? The WPA study that she referenced, the Department of Justice study, and I'm forgetting one, the COPS study.
Oh, they had a survey.
Surveys. So one thing we will do is take a look where there's some comparability to see, are we seeing something unique here in our data? Now, granted, we're in 2021, some of this was done 5 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, so there could be some variables based on, like we said, COVID or other things, but, you know, we can look at that and see. And second, and I'm sure this is not going to be helpful to you immediately, but you know, one of the reasons that you guys said you wanted this done a little bit was for a baseline as well. So, you know, we can't say for sure that, you know, 75% agreement that police are doing a good job is really excellent. Sounds really excellent. How will it compare in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years? I think that's an important thing to consider. So some of this we're sort of stabbing in the dark a little bit.
I mean, to that, I was going to mention that, because I think one way I did present the information in kind of a biased fashion is I presented the percent favorable responses most of the time. So,
let me suggest that maybe what we do is take a limited time to review it in greater detail and see if you have concerns that we might want to try to accelerate our next meeting date so that we can get the feedback to April and Eric so that we can drive the report. If you see anything else that's glaring or anything that comes up after tonight. I do want to spend some time, though, talking about the focus groups, and I think we need to begin that planning process. And I think the first thing we need to do is determine what is the purpose of the focus groups, so we don't, you know, and get agreement. Is it to identify gaps? Is it to supplement the findings of the survey? Is it to get input on recommendations that we're in the process of developing? Is it to try to identify additional questions that the public may have, trying to elicit other feelings of those underrepresented groups? We've made commitments today to have, you know, we've talked in the past, I shouldn't say we've made commitments, but we've talked about doing something with the biracial people of color. I think clearly we've looked at, by virtue of the results, we probably have the H2N, the Hmong Hispanic groups that are underrepresented. We've committed to the Wausau Police Department, we would try to sit down with their management and their rank and file separately to try to get feelings. We've talked a little bit at one time about having mental health professionals weigh in. Again, these are just groups that we've thrown out there. We've talked about offenders as a group or a category. Tonight we've talked about the under 30. I don't know if there's a value in looking at that different with those with mental illness or that mental health, where we want to take that. But what is it that you would think we would want to get out of the focus groups going forward that then helps us design them and, you know, get sort of some expectations of what we would want the members to comment on? Any thoughts?
I think a few of those, I mean, obviously, task force, so we want to get recommendations. We want to identify where there are gaps. Obviously, a baseline to measure sort of how things are going based on what we do here in terms of our recommendations, how things move forward. I would say those would definitely be the main things. Some of the groups, I think, what the surveys are here doing, are helping us, are to hone down in terms of some of those groups to find out where we need to be looking, what groups we need to be talking to. Whereas I think when we started, we didn't start with any data, so we tried to identify as many groups as possible. Now with the data, we can start seeing where there's differences and hone down some of those groups.
William used the exact word I was going to use, which is honing. I think we have to avoid any whiteboard type activity with these groups, and it's honing. You guys are experts, you conduct focus groups, but, there are things that are just not answered in quantitative responses. And it's, saying, hey, we saw this, and this is kind of the conclusion that we're drawing out of this. What do you think about that? Is that an accurate portrayal? Is it, we don't really understand this. Can you give some insight? But, to me, the groups that we really need to focus on are the underrepresented groups and really the youth. I mean, the high school students and college students. I mean, those are the people that we absolutely want to have good interactions with the police that are, wrestling with these issues, I think, nationally to a significant degree, and the group we want to keep here in this community.
Yeah, I have two thoughts. One is I really wish I had laid out all the idiographic responses, the open-ended comments. And so I'm sorry I didn't get all those on there. At least then you'd have them to walk away with, and I could certainly compile them and send them out tomorrow, but they wouldn't be categorized or, so. We could try that. Could try to categorize them by the end of the week. So hopefully that could help, at least guide the discussion about questions to ask these groups. I had two questions. One, were there any findings that you were like, oh, that's really cool, or, oh, I'm really surprised that's worse than I thought? And I had a question for you, but I can't remember it. Something police oriented. Anyway, but just in general, I'm curious if you had reactions about the data. Oh, I know what it was. It was kind of in the surprise, like coming from the police perspective, would you expect that negativity from youth?
Do I have to use a mic? No, you keep your spot. I've been here before. I know this works.
Why don't you just sit up there? It's just...
So that doesn't surprise me for a whole host of reasons. I have 3 young adult children who I donate significantly to the UW system, and their overall attitude toward authority in the last 2 years and that of their friends, I have seen a reduction, which I think is COVID related. I think it's socially related, that they haven't had the interactions and the impact that COVID's had on them. So that didn't shock me as much as the statistic associated with militarization. And so I almost would prefer a question to be answered for me that we would find beneficial is, what does that mean in the eye of the respondent? Does that mean, should the Wausau Police Department be driving tanks down Grand Avenue? Or does that mean you don't like the way we dress or what we wear as equipment? Like, I don't know what that necessarily means in that answer, but it'd be helpful to understand that.
I just wanted to comment, and maybe April's got some comments, Matt, that is actually something we would really like to ask in the focus groups, because we struggled, I'm not going to lie, on that exact question and the language and the fact that people mean different things. Like, does it mean that you draw a gun in certain situations, or does it mean, like you said, we're driving a tank? We don't know. So a focus group actually is the right type, I think. I think a survey is really hard sometimes to get at that. So I agree with you on that. Something that I'm kind of curious about too, for young people is, their attitudes. How much of this is driven by something that they've seen locally, right? Which I'm going to guess they really haven't seen a lot locally, versus, this overall sort of picture, this composite picture that they're developing about authority, about policing, about what's happening nationally. And really, you can't also it's hard to measure that in a survey as well. We struggle a little bit with that, so I think in a focus group, we could really dig in a little deeper.
I think the focus group might also answer for us what might be causing, exactly to your point, especially with youth, where I think that national issues and movements and what seems to be the politicizing of many police-related issues, and you're either all in or you're all out on particular issues that may have impacted that age group at a much higher rate than it would have maybe older people in our community.
Pat?
I have a very simple observation. One was that we were talking about focus groups and mentioned young people and Southeast Asians, think that'd be good. And then in your wisdom, you pointed out a whole bunch of other ones that we could have. And so my simple observation is that if we had 2 focus groups, and I'm not advocating for keeping it to 2, but if we could have 2, we could have them together, we could all be there. We have 10 focus groups, we got a whole nother ballgame. And who would do them, how would, we can't, unless we stretch them out over months and months, we can't all be in the room as a task force, so.
The only, the
Something
word
to
of
wrestle with.
caution that I would throw out on having 2 focus groups is if you have them and you have representation of the groups, it gets so large that some people will not participate. And so the question becomes one of what is the optimal size to encourage a free flow of information and dialogue, and I don't think 2 would do it. That's the concern.
No,
I don't think we
it would.
need.
I was thinking that, those are good ideas, let's do those 2. And then you said this, and I thought, that'd be good, that'd be good, that'd be good, that'd be good. So where do we stop?
Yeah. Well, I think that ultimately we need to, so I think we were talking, I think initially 5, 6, 7, in that area when we were scoping the work of this group. I think that could still be a target. I don't know that we would all want to be there just because we want to make sure that people can express their thoughts freely without, I think we can sometimes be intimidators.
I think it's especially true if you're dealing with young folks. We have to be very conscientious about, like if you get a focus group of young folks and there's 5 of them and there's 10 of us, that dynamic, it's like going to church, right? It's like, so I think we need to be, I think we need to be sensitive to that. I think especially if we look at some of the focus groups might have different areas to discuss. Young kids versus mental health versus, whatever, there may be some question changes. I was going to ask, I don't know how hard it would be that we could understand who the respondents were on some of the open-ended questions, not their name, but some of the key demographics, so that when we read them, we're able to say, oh, this person's been arrested 2+ times under the age of 30 and doesn't own their own home, and they feel the cops are picking, versus I've been here for 70 years, and, because I think that is important with open-ended questions, is to understand what that person's life story is as best we can, and what their social journey has been and their social story for us to help.
That's great, yeah. I can do that.
Yeah, we have some people that can do that. And partly to Pat's point and others, I think that when you're dealing with young people, when you're dealing with people who may have mental illness, if this is one of the things that we've seen as a correlation to some of the other variables, frankly, when you're dealing with police officers, who may have things to say, my recommendation, very strong recommendation, is that you not attend the focus groups. And you don't have to employ us to do them, but whoever you get to do them, I just think it's a matter of trust in terms of what people are willing to tell you, especially around issues that can be very sensitive. And you're going to have to, whether it's us or someone else, you need to trust whoever's going to do them to also, report the findings. And we try very hard to do that in a fashion that doesn't identify the people, but at the same time, allows them to express their opinions honestly. We did this with a whole bunch of students around COVID issues, and I think if we had had teachers, administrators in the room, it would not have gone very well, to be quite frank. So, just one opinion.
So why don't we, again, I hate to keep kicking things down the road, but let's revisit the focus group discussion once we have that, we're further enlightened by the survey results. But I really want you to think through, where are their gaps? What recommendations, what concerns do they have? And how many do we want? And I think, again, I would echo Eric's concerns that we try to stay as much as we'd like to be there, let the groups go, and get that input back from them. But I think we need to think about what do we want to get out of it at the end of the day. So maybe, Eric, we could have some discussions between now and that next meeting on framing those issues. If you have some specific concerns that you'd like to have raised, we'd welcome those. Pat?
I think some very good points have been made, and I think thinking it through, it would not be good to recruit 10 teenagers or 20-somethings, bring them in here, and put them in front of us and say, okay, come up here and give us your candid, feelings about the police force and that big guy over there is a cop.
Only if he was in his SWAT uniform. If we could get the SWAT guys in here for that, I think that'd be.
Yeah. Anyway, things I hadn't thought about, and they're very good to learn about, so I think we're on the right track.
I do have one other question as I'm thinking about how to manage the focus groups. Because I was listening, I may be wrong. Was the characterization in terms of non-white, was it more that white and non-white agreed except for when it came to age largely? Or did you see a stark difference overall? Because it seemed like, at least as I was looking, it seemed like the difference there wasn't not white versus non-white, but more age if they were younger. So that
there were some white and non-white differences, but in terms of attitudes toward the police, trust in the police, but the difference, if you were to compare the size of the demographic group differences, young versus older was bigger than that. And we saw a few variables that white and non-white participants did not differ in their attitudes. For example, what was one of them? Attitudes about safety in their community, that there should be more investment in de-escalation training. They didn't differ. They did differ on a lot of variables, but, and the non-white included, that wasn't just like white, black. 1.5% of the sample was black, 1.5% Asian, and then others. And anybody who said other, I did not include at all, because people who said other would say American, human. They didn't give meaning, they didn't give helpful race or ethnicity information. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, because I guess that does answer my question, but I guess I was thinking through this, like in terms of when we do these focus groups, is it more helpful to almost look at sort of these groups in terms of white, non-white, or just mainly making sure, looking at diversity within just age?
I see. I don't know. I think you also have to consider whether, we talked about this before with the students, if you bring them in and say, we really wanted to talk to you because you're a member of the Hmong community, then they feel like we only want their voice because we just want their voice, right? As opposed to we're only going to them for their identity categorization. We don't want them to feel that way. I don't think we do. I'm assuming they, they want to feel valued for what their perspective is, whatever their race or ethnic background is. So there has to be a way to draw in individuals of communities who have been less represented without them feeling like they've been drawn in for that sole purpose. That's the way I see it. So how to arrange those groups so there's diversity, but also comfort in that group they're in, I think that's a touchy issue.
Why, I'm going to sort of interject a chair's discretion because we've got other topics tonight. Go ahead, Eric, but then we're gonna wrap it up.
So we've done a lot of focus groups in the last year with young people. And so based on some of that direct experience on very difficult issues, I think April's point is to do our best to recruit multiple ethnicities and identities within that age category. And that it's able to do that. And frankly, when you're talking about an issue that isn't necessarily directly about their race or ethnicity, right? It's about their opinions about some social issue like policing, then they actually appreciate the fact that they're not being singled out for whatever their identity is. And yet you can still, do your best to have some representation, in the pool that you draw from. On the other hand, I do think there's some value, and I think working with Among Americans Center and other groups in the community to have a sort of a group that's clearly underrepresented based on their demographic identity can also be helpful. So I'm trying to say, I think you can do both and, if that makes sense. So I'll leave it at that.
In light of the discussion that we've kind of kicked the can down the road, I'm looking at a next meeting date. And while Eric's still here in company, thank you so much, April, for working so hard this weekend. I'm looking at my schedule and other things, but I'm looking at potential dates of the 8th, Wednesday the 8th, Monday the 13th, or Wednesday the 15th of September. How do those work for, again, 8th, 13th, or 15th? Okay.
Parks and Rec is in here until 7.
Okay.
If we went a little bigger,
We could start at 7,
we'd probably work that. What was your second, what was your third date?
15th.
That would probably be okay.
What are your thoughts? I think it's important we not go a month. 13th or the 15th? 13th, Eric, how's that for?
That's good for me. I don't know about for you. So anyway, yes, I think either of those dates would work. The one thing I'll also say is, between now and then, because I know that's a little bit distant here, we're planning on having some conversations, right? Even if it's by email. And if there are certain groups that, you already know, we definitely want to go down this path. We can start organizing some of those sooner rather than later without determining the entire slate of focus groups. I'm just saying that's a possibility. We're open to it, but again, obviously it's going to be up to you guys.
Let me just caveat that comment. We can have discussions, but we can't have debates through email. We can't have policy made through email because it's a violation of the open meetings law. So if you have suggestions for the purposes of making sure that we've captured those thoughts, that's fine, but we can't get into I agree or I disagree because we're violating the law. So ultimately, we'll have to bring it back here for a final concurrence, just so everybody's aware that we've got that limitation.
Could we, as a group, give you direction tonight that up to 3 or 4 focus groups that you could authorize the specific composition of those groups before our next meeting to start them off? I mean, I think we're general agreement on that.
why don't we, Eric and I and April, we can talk and we'll bring back some recommendations. How's that? We'll try to do them the week before so we can share those with you so you can have a chance to look at them for,
But you don't want to say, go on that one, go on that one. You want to bring it back here.
I think, given the need to make sure that we've got, we understand the process, I think it would just be helpful to make sure that we are capturing the thoughts of this group. Well, I think it would be hard, would be hard pressed to get it in place by then anyway, in a meaningful manner. You're basically 2 weeks.
I'm going to make a recommendation. I would recommend that you have 1 under 30 of varied race and ethnicities. 2, that you have a group with mental health conditions or concerns. 3, that you have the Hmong population focus group. 4, you mentioned police officers. I think we need that perspective. And there was a 5th one on my mind. Yes, thank you. Those who have been arrested or had 2 or more stops.
So moved?
That's my recommendation, those
We
5.
can move
Second
accordingly.
Mr. North's motion.
It's been moved and seconded to create those focus groups. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed?
Sorry, I wanted to jump in there. I guess if the board, if the task force is comfortable, I kind of agreed with Chairman Robinson, just because we just looked at this information, I looked at a lot of information, and I think in terms of digesting some of that first and actually going through that, might be helpful just to make sure that these are what we want to focus on rather than just jumping at it right now. But that's just my take.
I haven't, is that a motion to lay this over till the next meeting?
It is, I'll make that. Oh,
All right, is there?
I can second that, because I'd like to see the open-ended stuff.
All right. All those in favor of laying this over till the next meeting will signify by saying aye.
I,
I,
Opposed, no. That motion carries.
I'll just note, your recommendation was brilliant.
Oh, no, I didn't.
Thank you.
wanted to get the idea out there about it.
I think we want to be deliberate, and I think that's the desire, and deliberate and inclusive, but timely, which aren't always necessarily related to each other.
speaking of that,
Thank you.
did we decide on the 13th or the 15th?
Oh, we didn't. So which is the 13th work?
13th
7?
works for me.
7 PM on the 13th. And could you send that out tomorrow? The invite?
Oh, the 7 o'clock meeting?
7 o'clock on the 13th.
Yeah.
Yes. So we get it on the people's calendars right away for Kaylee and Sarah. Okay. We're going to, we have a handout, if you want to pass those that way, and if you want to, Michael, pass these this way. We're going to defer any action or discussion on the update in state legislation affecting policing. We had captured the Speaker's Task Force recommendations as part of our blueprint for change and the Presidential Commission recommendations. This is just a feeble attempt to capture some of what's going on. It's not complete. We'll update it, but I sent it to, Matt and I were talking last week, and I tried to use the Wisconsin Counties Association website to capture it. It wasn't as friendly as I thought, and Ben Graham cleaned it up nicely for us. But you have this both electronically and in a hard copy. We'll update it, we'll talk it at the next meeting, but I think we need to get at the issues that Matt is here to talk to us tonight about. So, without objection, we'll deal with that at a future meeting. Defining needs for additional services. Matt? You have a tendency to show up for meetings that go long.
I should ask me not to attend at that point then. I just got a text from my wife. I forgot to silence my phone. It said, "Where are you?" I said, "I think you can watch me on YouTube." But these issues really rang true to me that I'm going to address as we listen to, listening to the percentage of our population responding to a survey that are expressing issues with mental health or other things like that in their life. So what I was tasked with doing is working with our staff and trying to identify gaps really that are related to or associated with dealing with people that are in crisis. And so I'll give you the 30,000-foot view of what we came up with, and anything that piques your interest, I'll do my best to answer any questions you might have from that. First and foremost, if I surveyed our staff and said, what's the biggest gap in the 5115 crisis process, they'd say the amount of time. They've gotten really good at using big words like trauma-informed, and they'd say, Matt, it's not trauma-informed that someone in crisis, it takes 8 to 9 hours to get them to where they're beginning to receive treatment or medication. And that's an issue that we've been working on, mitigating for years, but it has to do with partnership with our local hospitals and Aspirus. It has to do with different doctors, whether they be at North Central Healthcare or at Winnebago Mental Health. And we just know that if someone's going to Winnebago, we're averaging 9 hours before we can get them to begin getting services. So it's a constant frustration, and I would call that a gap in services and how quickly we can get people help. Another one of the issues simply has to do with, and let me just, before I go any further, I'll just clarify that there's plans in place currently to address some of these gaps. But as we sit here today, we believe there's a gap in lack of medical detox facility or availability locally for people that need detox. So we have individuals that are actively intoxicated. They are alcoholics or they're addicted to a drug that would involve a detox situation. And they have to sit and wait until they're getting sick before they can start to receive assistance detoxing and medically monitored detox. So that's something we've seen that we definitely believe we can see some improvement on. One of the things that COVID has definitely impacted us is we believe there's a significant lack of residential treatment facilities in the Wausau area open today. I don't think the MMT Center is open yet at North Central. I know that the different plans I've seen, there's a robust construction occurring to create opportunity. So hopefully those things move forward. But as it is today, if someone shows up at our door and says, I've hit rock bottom, I need help, and we know that that help's going to require inpatient services, it's not available for them here. So we see that as a significant gap. It is interesting to see our officers who have very little professional training in AODA treatment starting to say this individual needs 90 days. And this a 21-day facility might not work for this, but 28 days might help. So our officers are definitely getting engaged with people who are receiving services, and they're starting to see which different types of programs work for each different individual and trying to identify which one that might be. But currently nothing exists here, and I don't mean that to be flippant. I mean that our officers are really starting to pay attention to that and starting to get involved in those individuals' lives at a level where they're starting to see what the difference between those different programs are. One of the other issues that we definitely see as a gap, and I'm going to be intentionally very careful how I state this, is we have people who receive services that are involuntary. They're court-ordered. It's very easy to get people to comply in those situations because they're court-ordered, and there's a stick, right? It's you do this or, and you can be taken into custody. It's individuals who are there voluntarily that we tend to see a gap with, and they're involved in community treatment, and there's lots of people actively participating in their community treatment, but the individuals that we want to participate in community treatment that have to require, like an Officer Lemerond, who physically goes and gets them and takes them to their community treatment. So we think there's a gap in that there are those people providing community treatment, but we need people out in the community who are actively engaged on a daily basis with this population that needs that the most. And the two that came up most significantly were people suffering from AODA and mental health issues in our homeless population, and also elderly, in regards to, we need the Aging and Disability Resource Center to try and provide resources for these individuals, but frequently some of our elderly who really need those services don't want those services. And so the officers are left with, here's a resource that they may or may not be eligible for, but they don't want it because they might not be necessarily competent to make those decisions, or they don't want their freedom taken away. And the Aging and Disability Resource Center and any resources they have available are like, it's voluntary. If they don't want to come, they don't want to come. And then we look at individuals not receiving services. Overall, with our AODA population, our homeless population, our mentally ill population, we see a significant issue with affordable housing. It is hard to ask someone to address their addiction issues and their mental health issues if Maslow's hierarchy of needs aren't being met for them. And so if we have individuals who have an income because of Social Security disability, for example, but they can afford $200 to $500 a month for housing, that just doesn't get them a house in Wausau right now. So we see that as a gap. Regarding our experiment in our homeless population where we're providing housing for them, we have seen some successes, but we also recognize that we would be able to prevent, we believe, a significant amount of our failures where people, we see recidivism and we see people taking 10 steps forward and we're very proud of them, and then they take 20 back, and then it takes us another couple months. And we think that's because our finding is we need 24-hour supervision and outreach for that population. If they can do great when they're being supervised and when support's being provided to them, but those 10 to 16 hours a day when that's not available to them, we see that's when people struggle with their decision making. A couple of other areas that we think there's room for improvement or gaps. Most of you, I believe, are familiar with our CART program and the staffing we do with mental health professionals partnered with police officers during the day. I don't think there's a single person at the police department that wouldn't argue for more availability of mental health professionals to partner with law enforcement. So a night shift mobile crisis. We don't believe that it would require necessarily pulling police officers that are full-time night shift CART officers. So some type of blended program that would include maybe staffing mobile crisis out of the police department so they're more aware of those issues and they can respond with officers. We think there's definitely significant value in looking at a model that would include more mental health workers at the police department. And then lastly, one of the gaps, which is a biggie I know that Mr. Harris and I have discussed, is transportation. A significant amount of the population that we deal with significant mental health concerns, AODA concerns, or the elderly for that matter, have a gap when it comes to transportation. So, and it's the ease of that transportation to be able to get them to services. We can work with someone who says, yep, I'm going to go get help, and we will make the arrangements and we will schedule the appointment and we'll use our influence to get them to the front of the line, and then they don't show up. And then when we follow up with them, how come you didn't get there? Why didn't you attend? And they're like, I didn't have any way to get there. So we see transportation as another gap with that population. So I'll stop, and those are the ones I had highlighted, and I'll feel free to answer any questions here.
So I just have a couple of questions. First, as it relates to 5115, what do you think is a target in terms of hours to get to service or to treatment? If it's running 8 to 9 now, what would be ideal?
Well, ideal for me, which I think is the end goal, and you have someone that knows more about the plan. I don't know if he wants to talk about it, but the fact of the matter is we have the North Central Healthcare. I think officers should be able to pick up an individual in crisis. It's approved that they're going to go. We take them to North Central Healthcare and we drop them off. They're with officers for a half hour. And I know that the overall plan is that there will be staff at North Central that can do the basic medical clearance unless there's something really outside the ordinary. I think that's hopefully within a year to 2 years from now. And we're really looking forward to that. It doesn't help us with the person tonight that ends up having to go to Winnebago, and it's an 8 to 9 hour program. The beauty here is a year ago, if you'd have asked me this, number one on the list would be that gap in services for youth, and that doesn't exist here now because now we have a youth mental health hospital that's on campus. So there's definitely improvement that's occurring here, but that's still the gap. But John, if you were in crisis and you need to be hospitalized, I'd like to believe that we could respond to your house and we can have you receiving services and being medicated if that's what's necessary within an hour.
Other questions? So you raised the issue of the CART team suggested that one of the ways is to provide additional mental health officers at the PD. What would that look like, and are there some models where that's been done?
Sure. I mean, that's what we did. Before CART was what it is today, we had Chuck, who's still there right now. Chuck came to the police department. He had a phone. He took calls through the crisis center, and that's where he would have been staffed if he wasn't at the police department. And he was more readily available to build relationships and to respond with officers to calls. So I think we would take what we did originally with an additional staff person and measure how frequently they're being utilized, because we know that when there's a partnership between a police officer and a mental health worker responding to the individual crisis, we get much better outcomes, not only for us as a law enforcement agency and efficiencies, but much better outcomes for the individual in crisis.
Michael, did you?
Yeah. I'm in a position probably to speak more freely now, but as it relates to what Matt's grasp of the situation is, I think it's really, really strong. I'd just say a couple things, I think, from my perspective about what I think would be game changers. I still firmly believe that if the course of everything that's planned at North Central is executed the next year or two, it will make a substantial difference. It will be fundamentally night and day in this community, and all the things that they're building there is truly going to be transformational. So I still believe in that. I do believe that the 5115 system is a glass house. I think that's going to have legal challenges. I think it's going to continue to be more and more difficult to have people on longer-term commitments. I just really think that that's going to be a challenge in the future, and I think that's going to get pressed. There's been some test cases. I just really have doubts in my mind. So it's going to be harder, to get in those situations, and then the question's always, well, then what? I've got this person in front of me, then, if I can't do that, then what? And there's just not a lot of options. The two things I learned, I think, most profoundly and think would be hugely impactful is targeted case management in this community. And secondly, there's this, distinction between needing a treatment professional and somebody just needing custodial care. A lot of what we do in institutions gets on the lines and verge of custodial care versus actual treatment. And if we had supported housing more proliferated in this community that had custodial type supports with individuals with mental illness, it would make a huge difference. And in May, I was on the brink of having a conversation with the state Medicaid director because we were going to do what we were doing at McClellan and be able to package it in a reimbursable model under Medicaid to address both housing and treatment and really frankly custodial care. And I think that would have made a dramatic difference in the success in our community had we been able to do that pilot program. So those are my couple thoughts.
I would just echo what you said, that the bureaucracy of grants and funding sources and Medicare, Medicaid, that I don't have a great grasp of that, but I know that recently we were having success with some of our homeless population who were willing to accept treatment. And that treatment is very expensive, and it was being done out of town, and we were getting people in, and the grant was funding that. And then we had someone who was willing to go that really needed treatment, except they were on Medicare, Medicaid, whichever meta it was, which covers the cost of the treatment, but does not cover the cost of room and board associated with residential treatment. And the grant wouldn't cover the room and board. It wanted to cover everything, but it wouldn't cover everything if Medicaid was covering a portion. So here we have a gap. An individual wants treatment, isn't able to get treatment as a result of that. And so those are issues that we're dealing with on a frequent basis, which is just dealing with the different organizations and the rules associated with the funding to do those things. But I will echo everything Michael said. I think that's pretty spot on some of the issues we're dealing with where we believe we can be successful with a population. We just don't necessarily have all those resources available to us yet.
Other questions? Maybe, Matt, in light of our charge of developing recommendations, it might be helpful for us if we could perhaps, I think what you've done tonight is done a very good job of highlighting what the issues are. I think what we need to then do in the next step is if there's general, I don't sense that there's anybody that disagrees with what you've laid on the table, is what is the actionable item that we want to advance is in the context of a recommendation. So what would those look like? And probably as importantly, where are we looking for the funding to do that? And I think that it's appropriate for us to identify those outside parties that have a role and not be afraid to do that ask. You've got the American Rescue Plan dollars with the potential for behavioral health dollars with both the city and the county and other communities. So I think that it's a great time for us to be a little bit creative in those contexts, but it might be help. You've identified issues, now we have to identify the solutions. So how, do you have any thoughts, or, I think we could probably work over the next, between now and the next meetings to try to refine those and develop those into recommendations?
I think one of the challenges is it would be easy for me to say, just make sure there's enough funding to run AODA inpatient rehabilitation in the greater Wausau area.
Yeah.
But also to differentiate between the homeless population outreach that we're doing and crisis, the crisis program or our CART program. And maybe there's a recommendation from a group that says there's a way to meld some of those together. But to Mr. Loy's point, like I could see 3 people being employed full-time that are out in our community on a daily basis that are looking for their clients and building relationships. We used Officer Eric Lemerand over the last year to do that with our homeless population, but some of the individuals he's working with are people that are in crisis that we're taking into custody, and that model is going to end in December. And we're still going to have Eric involved or an officer involved for 10 to 12 hours per week, addressing the things that have a law enforcement nexus. But the idea of paying a police officer rate of pay to do social work outreach or case management outreach doesn't seem like a sustainable model. So if 2 or 3 individuals could be used, maybe there's a program where they're working out of a facility like the McClellan Street House. I don't know exactly what that would look like. I think that would be valuable. If there's opportunity to use federal dollars, COVID dollars for that, I personally would be supportive of that. But I would say that I don't think this concept, it would be successful if we hired those individuals. but the need would most likely outlast those dollars. So is that a county program to fund? Is that a city program to fund? Is that a partnership? Are those grant dollars from local foundations or some combination of the above? I think those are conversations that are definitely worth having. And then secondly, whether it's associated or not, the addition to the CART program, and I would say the same thing, whether that's a combination of resources or I leave it to policymakers to decide, do we just want to get it off the ground right now with federal dollars or to be able to have additional staff? And then my disclosure is I haven't sat down with our partners at North Central and said, hey, I'm going to go to a meeting and make recommendations that you put more of your employees here. I don't think they'd disagree as long as they had the ability to find those employees and there was funding associated with it.
Pat?
Yeah, thank you. I think the other thing we need to consider is, I think this is a very significant list of challenges for us. I think we need to sort out which ones we tackle and which ones we dangle in front of the homelessness task force, the low-income housing task force, and other bodies to see who'd be willing to spearhead the efforts in some of this stuff. 'Cause we're here to do the policing, and this is related, but whatever.
But I think our task when we were created was broader than just the policing side. It was to look at the issues of trauma, homelessness, mental health, and others. So if we have, we can't control the outcomes, but I think we can control our recommendations. That may go beyond the police department, because I think that if we limit it to the police department, it's too narrow. And I think we have spent time looking at it, but, I'll defer to the other members, but I think we've got a broader brush than the narrow one of just what is at the police department, because those policies and those funding decisions affect how they react in the Wausau Police Department, how the jail, what the jail population is, and others, and I think that's what we've been asked to try to look at.
I'll just comment again. I think that the reason we're where we're at is because at the end of the day, if others that are involved in this just don't do anything, the last people standing are the people wearing a badge. Mm-hmm. And they're just going to allow that to happen because at some point you're just going to have to take care of it. I mean, you are the last line of interaction a community can have. And so I do think we have to pull together coalitions and be innovative and call, different departments in Madison and say, hey, look, we want to fix this. Like, this is what we want to do. If somebody goes in the emergency room, 90% of the time they don't need to go to the emergency room. It's costing you Medicaid $2,000 a pop or so to go to the emergency room. If we can avoid that 40% of the time, let's do that for a while. Because the problem is air traffic control. The problem is that people are in this situation that are acutely mentally ill are debilitated. I couldn't navigate the system if I was a sound mind. And when you are debilitated and trying to navigate the system and get resources, it's impossible. And so air traffic control, and that is not law enforcement, is what's needed. And if you had people available 24 hours a day, and the crisis worker's job is very, very distinct. It is, to prevent suicides and homicides. I mean, it is very distinct, and get people connected to services on an outpatient basis. It is clearly written that way. But what do you do then, right? When they don't meet that criteria, and those people need help, and they need people to navigate the system, and they need resources now, and that's just not available unless it becomes law enforcement's issue, and then you guys figure out a way to solve it because you're it. So I do think that is a solution on this is partnering together with other agencies to really bring in the ability to fund this, because it will work.
John, I would just add that to address Pat's point, Frequently, I think these issues in my perfect world wouldn't be law enforcement related. We can point to other states where the whole mental health component, the crisis, doesn't involve law enforcement unless there's a weapon being displayed. But that's not the way our statutes and our laws in Wisconsin are set up. So we are involved in all of that. And I'd love to be able to say our officers aren't social workers, they're not homeless outreach people, they're not all these things. But we seem to be the last point, and so then we have to be involved in that. And from a funding standpoint, I think success has been had to be able to show that investment in some of these initiatives and in people working out in the street keeps people out of hospitalization. And getting someone outpatient services is always cheaper than hospitalizing them. So I know that's not necessarily a city budget issue, but for a much larger community conversation, I don't have the data in front of me, but I would feel very comfortable saying that for every dollar we invest in additional crisis staff that go out in the community or outreach workers, we potentially are saving the greater area significant dollars in, like, put the fire out when you can do it with a cup of water instead of needing to send a fire engine to deal with it.
I would just add that I was really heartened by Michael's mention of the medical clearance part of getting people into service might be able to take place at North Central. I think that'd be huge, the capital H, because that's what I'm hearing is it's a big roadblock and financially and everything else. So that could be light a fire into that. Let's do that quickly.
Maybe in order to help us understand what our recommendations might be, is it, Matt, if we could sit down, we would be you and the police department, and then identify who those partners might be, the other partners, picking up on Michael's thought of building these coalitions and others, bring that back and saying that if we do transportation services at Wilsman, is that Metro, is it some other form to deal with those, and how might we go about doing that? But who are our partners? And then begin to, make some recommendations that are specific to those issues and specific to those partners. So we can take those issues that were presented tonight, try to begin to work on what does that mean? Who are the partners? Where are the changes? Where are the investments? Does that make sense? So I'll give you a call and we can set up a time. Any other thoughts? Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And now you can tell your wife that you're on the way home. Anything else to come before us tonight? I think we've laid out what we're going to do. We've set our next meeting. If not, we are adjourned. Thank you.